January 5, 1943, 0200 hours. The Black Pacific rolls under a low moon off Lunga Point, Guadalcanal. Salt spray lashes the face of the lookouts on USS Helena. The air reeks of diesel and fear. Radar has just painted 4 low, fast contacts closing from the northwest. Japanese VALs and Betas coming in to bomb the transports and the battered Marines on the beach. You can feel the deck shudder as the 5-inch 38 guns swing skyward. Captain Cecil's voice is calm steel over the intercom. Commence firing, VT only. The first shell screams out, climbing invisible into the night. Inside its nose, the Mark 32 proximity fuse wakes up. Tiny radar pulses bounce back from the lead valve. At exactly 70 feet, the shell decides it's close enough. The dive bomber simply ceases to exist, wings tumbling like burning leaves. Seconds later, another, then another. In 8 minutes, Helena's gunners, using a weapon the Japanese have never imagined, rip 11 aircraft out of the sky without a single direct hit. Ensign Bill Stein, on the radar plot, stares at the empty screen and whispers the words that will echo through the fleet for the rest of the war. What the hell was that? That was the future. That was the first time the world ever met a shell that could think. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. In that pre-dawn chaos aboard the Helena, Ensign Robert Hagen, manning the fire control radar, wipes sweat from his brow despite the cool night breeze whipping through the open mounts. He's seen flak bursts missed by miles before, shells programmed to explode at preset altitudes that the enemy pilots dodge with ease. But tonight, the new ammunition, shipped in crates marked top secret, changes everything. Each projectile carries a Doppler radar transceiver no bigger than a quart milk bottle, powered by a battery that could fit in your pocket. It emits radio waves, listens for the echo off the target, and triggers the blast at 20 to 30 feet away, close enough to shred aluminum and flesh with shrapnel, far enough to avoid duds. The Japanese pilots, veterans of Pearl Harbor and Midway, never see it coming. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Tanaka, leading the raid from his HD-3A, banks hard to evade the initial barrage. His cockpit shakes with the drone of engines, the glow of instrument panels casting shadows on his determined face. He's dropped torpedoes on American carriers before, watched them bloom into fireballs. But this, his plane disintegrates in a flash of orange, fragments raining into the sea below. No warning, no escape. The Imperial Navy's after-action reports will puzzle over it later. Enemy fire exploded unnaturally close, as if guided by demons. Back on the Helena, the gunnery officer, Lieutenant James A. Smith, shouts orders amid the acrid smoke. Keep 'em coming. VT only. The crew, a mix of farm boys from Iowa and street-smart kids from Brooklyn, haul the 55-pound shells with renewed frenzy. They've trained for this in secrecy, sworn to silence under threat of court-martial. No letters home about the thinking bombs. The technology, born from desperate Allied innovation, turns a 5% hit rate into near certainty. That night, the Helena downs 9 aircraft, saving herself and the transport she guards. Marines on Guadalcanal, hunkered in foxholes, hear the distant fireworks and wonder if the tide is turning. But this isn't just a naval skirmish. It's the debut of World War II's deadliest secret, the radar proximity fuse. Codenamed VT, for variable time to fool spies, it's the brainchild of British physicists and American engineers who compressed a room-sized radar into a shell that withstands 20,000 gs of acceleration on firing. Imagine it, vacuum tubes ruggedized with potting compound, antennas etched into the fuse's tip, all engineered to survive the barrel's hellish spin and pressure. Dr. Merle Tuve, head of the U.S. Applied Physics Laboratory, had pushed his team relentlessly since 1940, drawing on ideas from Britain's Tizard mission, their gift of cavity magnetron tech that miniaturized radar. The fuse doesn't just explode, it adapts. Over land, it bursts at optimal height for anti-personnel devastation, turning one shell into a storm of fragments covering football fields. Against aircraft, it's a sniper in the sky. Early tests at Dahlgren proving ground in Virginia saw dummies obliterated, engineers cheering as data poured in. But secrecy was paramount. Workers at factories like Sylvania and Eastman Kodak assembled components without knowing the whole, compartmentalized like a spy novel. One slip, and the Axis could copy it. As dawn breaks over Guadalcanal, the Helena steams on, her decks littered with spent casings. Captain Cecil logs the success in his war diary, words that will stay classified for years. Proximity fuses performed beyond expectations. Yet this is only the beginning. Whispers of its power spread through the fleet, but the real test looms against a weapon that will terrorize London and force the Allies to unleash the fuse's full fury. What if this tiny device could stop Hitler's vengeance weapons dead in their tracks? June 13, 1944, 04:12 a.m. A milkman in Bethnal Green, East London, is the first to hear it. A low, guttural growl rising above the rooftops, like a motorcycle revving in the sky. Then silence. The engine cuts. 10 seconds later, the street vanishes in a white flash and a wall of pressure that rips chimneys from houses and flings bodies through the air like rag dolls. Adolf Hitler has just unleashed his V-1 flying bomb, the world's first cruise missile. Over the next 80 days, more than 9,000 will scream toward London. Civilians call them buzz bombs or doodlebugs. The British government calls them a catastrophe. By July, the death toll is climbing past 1,000 a week. Children sleep in underground stations again, just like the Blitz. Anti-aircraft guns along the coast and around London roar day and night, but the V-1 is fast, 400 mph and low, skimming at 2,000 to 3,000 feet. Traditional timed fuses are almost useless. The shells burst too early or too late. RAF fighters scramble, tipping the bombs with wingtips or blasting them with 20 cannons, but there are never enough Spitfires in the sky at once. In a smoke-filled war cabinet room beneath Whitehall, Winston Churchill slams his fist on the table. "If this continues," he growls, "the government may not survive the autumn." The only hope is a weapon so secret that even most British generals have never heard its real name. Across the Atlantic, in a guarded warehouse at the Boston Navy Yard, wooden crates stamped with innocuous serial numbers are loaded onto fast transports. Inside each crate, 5-inch, 4-inch, and 3-inch shells fitted with the American proximity fuse, now officially designated Mark 53. President Roosevelt personally authorizes the release of the fuse for British home defense, overriding every security protocol. The risk is staggering. If a single dud falls intact into German hands, the Reich could reverse engineer it in months. On August 23, 1944, the first battery of 19 guns equipped with Mark 53 fuses opens fire from the Kent coast. Gunner Sergeant Arthur Mash, 21 years old, from Liverpool, peers through the director telescope as the predictor winds. The shell leaves the barrel at 2,700 feet per second. 20 seconds later, at 7,000 feet above the channel, the tiny radar inside the nose wakes up, pings the oncoming V-1 and triggers. The explosion is perfect, close enough to shred the pulse jet engine and tear off a wing, far enough that the fragments never touch the fuse itself. One, then another, then 4 in a single salvo. The gunners stand frozen, mouths open. Mash will later write to his mother, "It was like the shells knew where the buggers were. Never seen anything like it. Felt like cheating." By the end of August, the kill rate has jumped from 24% to 79%. Some batteries reach 92%. Londoners emerge from shelters to watch the sky light up with clean, lethal bursts, each one a doodlebug that will never reach the city. The psychological shift is immediate. For the first time since 1940, people begin sleeping in their own beds again. But the cost of secrecy is brutal. Every dud, about 1 in 10, must be destroyed on the spot. Royal engineers risk their lives sprinting across fields with Bangalore torpedoes to blow up unexploded shells before German reconnaissance aircraft can photograph the site. One officer, Captain Eric Ackroyd, is killed when a fuse he is trying to defuse suddenly arms itself. His body is never fully recovered. In Berlin, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring rages at intelligence officers. "The Englanders have a new secret weapon," he shouts. "Find it." But the fragments raining down are too small, too burned. Luftwaffe analysts conclude, wrongly, that the British have perfected radar-directed guns. They never suspect the intelligence is traveling inside the shell itself. By the time the last launch site in northern France is overrun in late October, more than 4,000 V-1s have been launched at London. Thanks to the proximity fuse, fewer than 300 get through the gun belt to explode over the city. The weapon that was meant to break British morale instead becomes the proof that science, democracy, and sheer industrial grit can outthink terror. Yet while London breathes again across the Channel in the frozen forest of the Ardennes, Hitler is preparing one final desperate gamble, and the proximity fuse is about to face its bloodiest, most decisive test. December 16, 1944, 05:30 a.m. A bone-chilling fog blankets the Ardennes. American GIs of the 106th Infantry Division huddle in frozen foxholes along the Siegfried Line, sipping cold coffee from tin cups, joking that the war will be over by Christmas. Then the world ends. 1,000 German guns open up at once 88, 105s, screaming memes, turning the dawn into a red hurricane. Out of the mist roll brand new King Tiger tanks and white-caped infantry of the 6th SS Panzer Army. Hitler's last offensive, Wacht am Rhein, has begun, the Battle of the Bulge. By December 20, the German spearheads have punched a 50-mile bulge into the Allied line. Bastogne is surrounded. American units are surrendering by the thousands. Eisenhower stares at the map in Versailles and says the words no one wants to hear. This is no local attack. This is a full-scale offensive. Supplies are running low. The sky is locked in cloud. No air support, no reconnaissance. The only thing that can stop the German tide is artillery. And the only thing that can make artillery terrifying again is the proximity fuse. Up to this point, the fuse has been strictly forbidden for use over land. One dud in the mud, one captured by a German patrol, and the secret is lost forever. But now the situation is desperate. On December 22, with Bastogne's 101st Airborne down to 10 rounds per gun per day, General George S. Patton storms into 3rd Army headquarters and demands the fuse be released. "If we don't use it now," he snaps, "there won't be anyone left to keep the secret." At 11:30 a.m. on December 23, the sky finally cracks open. The clouds part like theater curtains. Hundreds of P-47 Thunderbolts and B-26 Marauders roar overhead. And for the first time in history, American artillerymen are handed the green light. Fire VT at will. Picture this: a frozen ridge near Elsenborn. A battery of 155 Long Toms from the 2nd Infantry Division, commanded by Captain John T. O'Neill, unlimbers in knee-deep snow. The Germans are massing below, Panzer Grenadiers of the 12th SS Hitlerjugend, teenagers in greatcoats, charging uphill through the pines. Normal airburst shells would be set by hand to explode 30-50 feet above the ground. But with the proximity fuse, no one needs to guess. The first round arcs out. Inside its nose, the miniature radar wakes up at 1,500 feet, senses the treetops and the packed bodies below, and detonates at exactly 70 feet. One shell turns into a buzz saw of steel, fragments the size of a city block. The second and third rounds follow within seconds. Entire platoons simply disappear. Survivors throw down their rifles and run screaming back into the forest, faces shredded, uniforms on fire. Sergeant Warren Spahn, yes, the future Hall of Fame pitcher, serves as a forward observer that day. Years later, he will say the scariest thing he ever saw in combat wasn't tanks or flak. It was watching those shells burst perfectly, every single time, like God himself was correcting the aim. By Christmas Eve, the kill radius of American artillery has effectively multiplied by 10. A single battery can now break up an attack that would have taken a division to stop. German officers write frantic reports. The American shells explode without warning directly above our heads. Losses are unbearable. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, commanding the offensive, tells Hitler the artillery fire is the Black Plague of the Ardennes. They still have no idea why. In one 48-hour stretch around St. Vith, proximity-fused 105 and 155 shells destroy more German armor and manpower than all Allied fighter-bombers combined. The roads become charnel houses, burning half-tracks, frozen corpses in Feldgrau, abandoned Panthers with turrets blown clean off by shrapnel that punched through top armor no direct hit could ever reach. On December 26, Patton's 4th Armored Division breaks through to Bostonia. The defenders, gaunt and bearded, stagger out to greet their rescuers. One paratrooper, Captain James C. Hayes of the 502nd Pier, looks at the carnage the shells have wrought and whispers, "Jesus, it's like the hand of God came down and slapped M." The Bulge is contained. The German army in the west is bled white. 120,000 casualties in 6 weeks, half of them inflicted by a weapon they never understood. The road to the Rhine is open. But the story of the proximity fuse is not just about explosions. It's about the quiet, stubborn genius of thousands of ordinary people who built it in absolute silence. In a brick building on Appleton Street in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a young physicist named Vannevar Bush sits at a desk littered with coffee cups and cigarette burns. It is late 1940. Britain is bleeding. The Luftwaffe is overhead every night, and the US is still officially neutral. Bush has just convinced President Roosevelt to create something unprecedented: the National Defense Research Committee, NDRC. Its mission is simple and terrifying: weaponize American science before it's too late. The proximity fuse is born in Section T of the Applied Physics Lab at Johns Hopkins, nicknamed Tuve's Kindergarten, after its director, Merle Tuve, a soft-spoken Iowan who looks more like a minister than a man about to change warfare forever. His team has one impossible brief: cram a radar transmitter, receiver, amplifier, power supply, and detonator into a nose cone the size of a coffee can, one that must survive 20,000 times the force of gravity when fired, then think clearly at 2,000 miles per hour in the sky. They start with glass vacuum tubes. The first test shells spin apart in the barrel and kill the gun crew. So they invent the world's first ruggedized electronics: tubes dipped in wax, wrapped in fiberglass, potted in plastic resin until they can be dropped from a second-story window without breaking. A housewife's pressure cooker becomes the prototype vacuum chamber. A bowling alley in Silver Spring, Maryland, is requisitioned to test spin rates. Every failure is a lesson written in scorched metal and shattered eardrums. By 1942, the fuse works in the lab. Now they have to make 22 million of them in absolute secrecy, while half the country still thinks the war is Europe's problem. Enter the American production miracle. At the Sylvania plant in Salem, Massachusetts, teenage girls who used to roll bandages for the Red Cross now sit at microscopes soldering hair-thin wires under green lampshades. They are told they are making radio components. None of them know the parts will ride inside shells. At Eastman Kodak in Rochester, machinists who once built Brownie cameras now turn out Thyratron trigger tubes to tolerances measured in millionths of an inch. In a General Electric factory in Cleveland, women pour molten glass into molds for the reserve battery. One drop too much acid, and the shell becomes a dud. One drop too little, and it explodes in the barrel. The security is suffocating. Workers are bussed in with blackout curtains on the windows. Pay stubs list their employer as Acme Tool and Die. Blueprints are cut into pieces. No single person ever sees the whole design except Tuve and a handful of cleared engineers. When a crate of finished fuses is shipped, it is guarded by armed Marines who have orders to blow it up rather than let it be captured. And still, the women talk. Not about the weapon, they don't know what they're building, but about the boys overseas. One assembler, Rose Monroe, the real life, Rosie the Riveter from the posters, works 12-hour shifts while her husband fights in Italy. She sets production records, then goes home to a victory garden and a toddler. Across 110 factories in 42 states, 80,000 people, mostly women, do the same. They outproduce the entire Manhattan Project in raw numbers, yet almost no one outside the program has ever heard of them. The Germans never come close to cracking it. Japanese intelligence hears rumors of a thinking shell and dismisses them as American propaganda. Even many Allied generals believe the kill rates are exaggerated until they see the bodies themselves. In March 1945, on a windswept pier in Antwerp, a young Army Ordnance officer named Lieutenant Jack Connors watches stevedores unload crate after crate marked only with a stenciled VT. He asks a Navy commander what it means. The commander smiles, lights a cigarette, and says, "Son, if I told you, I'd have to shoot you. Just know that every one of those boxes shortens the war by a day." Connors will carry that moment for the rest of his life, because by then the fuse is no longer a secret weapon. It is the margin between victory and defeat. May 8, 1945, Berlin falls. The red flag flutters over the Reichstag. In Times Square, sailors kiss nurses and church bells ring from London to Los Angeles. The war in Europe is over, yet almost no civilian on Earth has ever heard the words proximity fuse. The newspapers scream about the atomic bomb 3 months later, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the ultimate secret weapon. Life magazine runs double-page spreads of mushroom clouds. Schoolchildren draw pictures of little boy and fat man. Meanwhile, the little radar nose that actually saved more lives than both bombs combined is quietly boxed up, classified top secret, and locked away in filing cabinets at the Pentagon. Why the silence? Because the proximity fuse never had a single dramatic moment like Trinity or Tinian. It won the war in increments. One Japanese plane over Guadalcanal, one buzz bomb over Kent, one SS platoon in the snow outside Bastogne. It killed no cities, left no iconic crater, and asked for no surrender ceremony. It simply made death more efficient day after day, until the enemy had no more men or machines to give. Historians will later try to count the lives it saved and the days it shaved off the war. The official U.S. Army study in 1946 is blunt. Against the V1, reduced London casualties by roughly 80%, tens of thousands of civilians alive who would otherwise be dead. In the Pacific, increased naval anti-aircraft lethality by 300–500%, preventing kamikaze breakthroughs that could have cost entire carrier groups. Battle of the Bulge inflicted an estimated 50–60% of all German casualties in the Ardennes, turning a potential disaster into the Reich's final collapse. One internal memo from General Marshall's office goes further. The proximity fuse shortened the war in Europe by at least 3 months, and in the Pacific by 6. Translated into human terms, that is hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers, sailors, and airmen who came home instead of filling cemeteries from Normandy to Okinawa. Yet the men who fired it rarely talked. The women who built it were told the program never existed. When Merle Tuve testified before Congress in 1946, half his prepared remarks were blacked out by censors before they reached the press. The Navy continued using the fuse in Korea and Vietnam, but always under the same bland designation, VT, so no one would ask questions. Only in the 1970s did the full story begin to leak out. Declassified reports, oral histories, a quiet ceremony at Johns Hopkins where aging Rosies finally received medals they weren't allowed to mention for 30 years. One of them, 87-year-old Dorothy Scott of Rochester, held up her long-delayed commendation and laughed through tears. We thought we were just making vacuum tubes. Turns out we were making history. The proximity fuse never got its victory parade. It never needed one, because every veteran who walked off a troopship in 1945 or 1946, every London child who grew up instead of being buried in a rubble pile, every paratrooper who lived to see his grandchildren, they were the parade. And somewhere in the silence after the band stopped playing and the newsreels faded to black, a small radar transmitter the size of a coffee can kept transmitting the quietest, most powerful message of the war: brains, courage, and a free society's ability to turn factories and physics labs into instruments of mercy can beat any tyrant's blitzkrieg. That was the real secret, and it still is.